I never thought something like this could happen to me. My name is Ryan. In October 2024, I was 27 years old. I worked remotely as a graphic designer and lived alone in a small apartment in Burlington, Vermont. It's funny, but I used to think I had built the perfect life. No one to bother me, no one to control me. I could drink coffee at 2 in the morning and wake up at noon if the deadline allowed. And yet there was something sticky about this freedom, like a thin film on my skin that even a hot shower couldn't wash off. My days were spent behind a computer screen. Logos for startups, book covers, endless revisions from clients who were never satisfied. A tab with Figma, a tab with email, a tab with chat. Can you make the font more friendly? Can you make the logo both minimalist and luxurious? I think it's missing some magic. And I smiled and typed, "Sure, I'll do it right now," while inside I felt something small and evil scratching at my ribs. In the evenings, the apartment became too quiet. Not romantically quiet, but the kind of quiet that emphasizes emptiness. The sound of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the occasional footsteps of the neighbors upstairs, as if someone were walking right through your thoughts. Mom called more and more often. "Ryan, how are you doing? When are you going to, well, you know?" I pretended to laugh and said that I had work, a life, plans. Then I hung up and stared into the darkness of the kitchen, and it seemed to me that the darkness was staring back. In autumn, I always felt a surge of energy. The leaves on the trees flashed red and orange, as if the whole world were burning in a quiet flame. The air smelled of wet earth, fallen leaves, and smoke from someone's distant bonfires. It was my favorite time of year because autumn seemed to allow you to be alone. On days like these, loneliness didn't feel like a failure, but like a choice. That year, I especially wanted to get away from the city, just to disconnect from everything, from notifications, from phone calls, from that dull inner anxiety that had become as familiar as background noise. I dreamed of silence, where I could just breathe, hear my own footsteps, and not feel guilty for having no one around. I chose an old motel 40 miles from civilization, the Quiet Slope. I found it on some forgotten travel website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2008. Pixelated photos, flashing banners, and reviews from people who seemed to have typed them on a typewriter. "Cozy and quiet as a grave," joked one of the commenters. I chuckled. I would have even liked it if there were likes. But now, looking back, that phrase seems less like a joke and more like a warning. I booked a room for the weekend, only $100 for 2 nights. It was so cheap that for a second I thought, why is it so cheap? But I dismissed the thought. After all, this is Vermont, not New York. I decided to drive my car, an old 2012 Honda Civic that I affectionately called Old Lady. She was reliable, but sometimes she coughed like a seasoned smoker. She started with a characteristic pause and grumbled on inclines. I knew all her sounds and could tell the difference between a normal squeak and a bad squeak. It's funny, but sometimes it seemed to me that my car was the only living thing that really knew me. On Friday after work, I packed my backpack, a couple of sweaters, a Stephen King horror novel, ironic, right? A thermos of coffee, and a playlist of lo-fi beats. I also threw in a small folding knife, not because I was paranoid, but simply because I had long since developed a reflex to think, what if? I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No one, not even my mom. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to hear, "Ryan, are you alone? In the woods?" Are you crazy? I left around 6 in the evening and opened the window so the wind could ruffle my hair. For the first 40 minutes, I really felt relieved. The city was left behind. The lights of advertising signs disappeared, and in their place appeared dark trees and scattered houses with yellow windows. I thought, 2 days of silence, forest trails, coffee on the porch overlooking the mountains, and I'll come back refreshed, full of ideas for new designs. I even imagined how in the morning I would draw in my notebook, not on a tablet, like in the movies, with lively lines without Ctrl plus Z. The road was almost empty, a narrow strip of asphalt winding through the hills of New Hampshire, bordering Vermont. Thick forests stretched out on either side, spruce, birch, and maple trees, already almost bare. The sun was setting quickly, painting the sky in shades of rust and purple. I kept catching myself thinking that it was painfully beautiful, and that pain was pleasant because it distracted me from another kind of pain. Sometime after 9 in the evening, fog began to roll in. It wasn't just a light haze, but a thick white wall that swallowed everything around it. The headlights of my old lady were lost in it, like in milk, illuminating only the nearest few meters of the road. I slowed down to 30 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The music became annoying. I turned off the playlist, and the silence in the cabin immediately became too loud. The navigator showed another 20 minutes before the turn onto the dirt road leading to the motel. I was already imagining myself lying in bed with the smell of damp wood, old sheets, and that special dust that accumulates in forgotten places. Maybe I'd even order pizza from the nearest town if they delivered. Life seemed simple and safe, just as it should be. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was a deer that had jumped out onto the road. In these parts, they often appear out of nowhere, and accidents involving them are common. But the silhouette was too human. Thin, unsteady, as if barely able to stand. The figure was standing on the side of the road, a couple of meters from the asphalt, and when the headlights swept over her, I realized it was a girl, barefoot. She was wearing a thin t-shirt, torn at the shoulder, where a dark streak was visible, dirt or blood. Her right arm hung limply, and a piece of chain dangled from her wrist, rusty, with a piece of pipe or metal at the end, as if it had broken loose from its tether in some old barn. When the headlights illuminated her face, my stomach dropped, as if I had suddenly found myself at the edge of a staircase and stepped into the void. Her eyes were huge, the whites red from burst blood vessels. Her cheeks were bruised, her lips cracked, and there was dried blood on her chin. Her hair was tangled, wet from fog or sweat. She raised her head, and there was something desperate, almost childlike, about the movement, as if she were praying for someone to notice her, yet afraid of being noticed at the same time. I braked sharply, instinctively. The car jerked, the tires screeched on the wet asphalt, and I was almost thrown into a tree on the side of the road. My heart leapt into my throat. I cursed aloud, sharply and loudly. My hands were shaking. She rushed towards me. She didn't run. She rushed, as if falling. She tripped over a root or a stone and fell to her knees right in front of the hood. She pounded on the hood with her palm, leaving bloody handprints. "Please, open the door. They're coming. They'll find me." Her voice was hoarse and broken, like someone who had been screaming for hours. She wasn't asking. She was exhaling her plea like her last breath. I froze behind the wheel. Thoughts raced through my head. A trap? A setup? A drug addict? Psychosis? That's how horror movies always start. A kind soul picks up a victim and then becomes the next one. I felt my mouth go dry. I saw the chain, It clanked against the hood, and the sound was like someone hitting bone with iron. But her face, there was nothing there but pure animal terror. Her eyes darted around like a cornered animal. She looked back into the fog, as if she expected shadows to emerge from the white veil at any moment. And at that moment, I became more afraid because she was afraid. Because fear in someone else's eyes is contagious. I pressed the central locking button. The doors clicked. That click sounded like a sentence. Not for her, but for me. The girl yanked the rear door handle, fell into the seat, slammed the door, and immediately curled up in the corner, pressing her knees to her chest. It smelled of wet earth, blood, and old metal, like an abandoned garage. "Go, please, go away," she whispered. Her teeth were chattering so loudly that I could hear it even through the noise of the engine. I pressed the gas pedal. The Honda lurched forward into the fog. The chain clanked against the door handle, leaving rusty marks on the upholstery. I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was about 25 or 26, with a tattoo on her forearm, something like a wolf or a dog, blurred by blood and dirt. "What's your name? What happened?" My voice was shaking. I tried to sound calm, but my words came out thin, like cracks in glass. I focused on the road, but the fog was thickening, visibility dropping to almost zero. She swallowed, as if there was dust in her mouth. "Lina?" She exhaled, as if the name itself was an anchor. "I was kidnapped 4 days ago." She spoke in fragments, as if each word caused her pain. I was hitchhiking from Montreal, looking for work in Boston, or anywhere just to get away. They picked me up on Highway 89, 2 of them at first, in a pickup truck. They said they'd give me a ride. Then a third joined us at a gas station. I thought, just people, just lucky. She tried to laugh, but it came out pitifully, short and joyless. Then her face contorted again. "They took me to the woods. They kept me in an old barn, abandoned, with rusty tools. They chained me to a post. They beat me. They did other things." She fell silent. I heard her suck in her breath, as if trying not to cry. The pause made the car feel cramped. "Not for ransom, just for fun. They filmed it. They said I was their new trophy." A chill ran down my spine. I felt nausea rising in my throat, not from fear, but from the realization that the world could be like this. I had always read stories like this as if they were about another layer of reality, about people who were unlucky. Now it was in the back seat of my car, alive, trembling, broken. "I broke the fastener," she continued, and for the first time, her voice was not panicked, but filled with desperate pride. "I ripped the pipe out of the rotten wall, with my hands, with my teeth, my skin." She looked at her wrist, and I saw that it was scraped raw. "I ran through the woods for hours. They're looking for me. They have dogs, and cars, and guns." Her words cut into me like a knife. I imagined a dark barn, the smell of mold and blood, dogs barking in the distance. And suddenly I realized that we were in the middle of this nightmare. I was alone. She was in the back seat. And all that separated us from those who were looking for her were the thin doors of the car and my pathetic folding knife in my backpack. "Should I call the police?" I asked. The words just came out. "I have my phone in my pocket." "Yes, but the reception is bad here," she said, as if she had already tried. "Give it to me, please." I handed her my iPhone over my shoulder, keeping my eyes on the road. My fingers were wet on the steering wheel. I didn't even realize I was sweating at first. She dialed 911 with trembling hands. The connection was poor. At first, I heard only static. Then the dispatcher's voice, as if from underwater. Lina leaned toward the phone, as if trying to bite into it. I've been kidnapped. I'm on Highway 89, in the fog. A man picked me up. They're close. In a pickup truck. Please, hurry. She was talking too fast, too desperately. I could see her jaw trembling, tears mixing with dirt on her cheek. She was trying to hold on, but her body was betraying her. The dispatcher was responding, but I could only catch fragments. Stay on the line. Nearest patrol, 20 miles, fog, will delay. Lina returned the phone and placed it on the seat. They said 25 minutes, maybe 30. Her voice grew quieter, but panic shone through it like a thin crack in glass. If they find us sooner, she didn't finish, and that was scarier than any words. 25 minutes, an eternity on a night like this. I drove as fast as I could, but the fog forced me to crawl along at a snail's pace. Rain began to drizzle, tapping quietly on the roof. The windshield wipers squeaked, leaving muddy streaks. The road seemed like an endless ribbon leading not forward, but deeper and deeper. Suddenly, Lina tensed up like a string. Headlights? Behind us. Look. I glanced in the mirror and my fingers went cold. Two yellow eyes in the fog were approaching quickly. A pickup truck. Tall, old, with a spotlight on the roof that cut through the white veil like a knife. It's them, she whispered, and there was something broken in that whisper. They can smell me. Like animals, I pressed the pedal to the floor. The Honda howled, the engine coughed, but we picked up speed. At that speed in the fog, we could crash into a tree or fly into a ditch at any second. For the first time in a long time, I felt real animal fear. Not anxiety, not stress, not, oh, I'm not going to make it. It was fear that smelled of iron and sweat. The pickup truck kept up. It kept its distance, like a predator that doesn't want to scare off its prey. Its spotlight darted around, sometimes catching the rear bumper of my car, and then the interior was flooded with white light for a second, and it seemed to me that we were being lit up for someone's camera. Lina suddenly grabbed my shoulder. Her fingers were cold as ice. I flinched so sharply that I almost jerked the steering wheel. There's a gas station up ahead. I remember the sign. Let's go there. There are people there, cameras, lights. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight. I could taste blood in my mouth. I must have bitten my cheek. A few minutes later, red neon letters appeared through the white haze. Seneca, gas, food. A small gas station on the outskirts with a couple of pumps and a small shop. The light was like an island in a sea of fog. I swerved sharply into the parking lot. The wheels skidded on the wet asphalt. The car swerved, but I kept it under control. I turned off the engine, and suddenly it became too quiet. I could hear my breath shaking. Get out, I said, trying to sound confident. Let's go inside. They won't dare. Lina shook her head. Her eyes were wild and huge. They'll see me right away. I'll stay here in the shadows. You go. Tell them to call the cops. Tell them it's urgent. I wanted to argue. I wanted to grab her by the hand and drag her inside, as if that would save us both. But there was so much terror in her face that I obeyed. I got out of the car. My legs were shaking like jelly. Fog swirled around us, cold and sticky, saturated with the smell of gasoline and wet earth. An elderly man in a plaid shirt stood in the store, the cashier or owner, with a gray beard and a tired look in his eyes. Behind the counter were shelves with chips, soda, and cigarettes. A TV in the corner was showing some old game with no sound. It was so ordinary that it shook me even more. as if the world had decided to pretend to be normal. I rushed inside, the door jingling the bell. "Police, urgent. There's a girl in my car. She's been kidnapped. Their car's coming this way. Please call 911. The man looked at me calmly, too calmly, as if he had seen it all before. He slowly picked up the landline phone and dialed 911. "Yes, Seneca gas station on 89th. A man here says they're chasing some girl. Kidnapping. Yes, we're waiting." I looked back at the car through the window. Lina was sitting in the back seat, crouched low, her face pale in the neon light. I could see her whispering something under her breath. A prayer? A curse? A plea? She was like a wounded animal that knew that if it was found, it would be killed. Then the headlights of a pickup truck illuminated the parking lot. The car slowly drove in and stopped 10 meters from my Honda. The doors opened. 2 men got out. One was tall, wearing a black hoodie that hid his face. The second was stocky, with a short beard and dirty jeans. The third remained in the cab, a silhouette, motionless, like a statue. It seemed to me that he had something long lying on his knees. A rifle? I blinked, and the silhouette seemed to smile, even though I couldn't see his face. They weren't in a hurry. They just stood there and watched. The flashlights in their hands scanned the asphalt. My mouth was so dry that my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The tall one approached the store door. He entered. He smiled at me. And that smile was wrong. His teeth were too even. He was too calm and confident. It was as if he had come not to look for a person, but to retrieve something that had been stolen from him. "Hello?" he said softly. "Have you seen a girl? Young, barefoot, with a chain on her arm. She escaped from a nearby hospital. Dangerous, hallucinations, aggression. We're staff. We're looking for her." He spoke so convincingly that for a second my brain tried to cling to it as a lifeline. Maybe it really was the hospital. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. But then I remembered her wrist, her voice, her trophy, and I realized, no, it was a lie, polished, familiar, like a salesman's smile. "No, I haven't seen anyone," I said. My voice sounded thin, just filling up. The tall man nodded as if he believed me, but his gaze slid to my car. He took a step, and I felt that it was all about to end. Like in a nightmare. You're running, but your legs are like cotton wool. You scream, but no sound comes out. He walked over to the Honda and looked inside through the window. I held my breath. All I could see was the edge of a t-shirt on the floor between the seats. Lina was hiding. She wasn't breathing. It felt like even the fog had frozen. The tall man leaned closer, his breath fogging up the glass. He stood there for a second, and that second lasted a year. Then he straightened up and returned to his partner. They exchanged glances. They shrugged, and suddenly, as if there was something mocking in that gesture, "Okay." They got into the pickup truck and drove away, slowly, without haste. The headlights disappeared into the fog. I exhaled so sharply that my head spun, but the relief was false, sweet, sticky, like the smell before rot. I ran out into the street, almost stumbling. I ran up to the car and threw open the back door. Lina lay motionless, curled up. At first, I thought she had lost consciousness from exhaustion. Then I saw the blood, lots of blood, on the seat, on the floor, on her arm. It dripped quietly, steadily, like a clock. She looked at me with wide open eyes, but her gaze was no longer alive. Her pupils were glassy. "Lina, no." I exhaled, as if her name could keep her here. She moved her lips. "They put a beacon in the chain." Her voice was barely audible. The tracker. They knew where I was. Everything inside me collapsed. I didn't want it to be true. I didn't want to understand. But I understood. I should have left earlier. I'm sorry. She grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip weak. Run. They'll come back. For you now. You saw their faces. You're a witness. I felt goosebumps running down my skin, not from the cold, from understanding, from the realization that her death was not the end, it was the beginning. Then her eyes rolled back, her body went limp. I screamed, not beautifully, like in the movies, but wildly, brokenly, like people scream when the air is taken from them. The cashier ran out of the store, saw the body, turned pale, and immediately dialed another number. I heard the words ambulance, urgent, blood, but they sounded like a foreign language. I checked her pulse, even though I didn't know how. My fingers were shaking. I put my hand on her chest and felt only cold and silence. She wasn't breathing. The blood from the wound on her wrist was too dark, too thick. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, flashlights, radios. 20 minutes after the pickup truck had left. 20 minutes that could have been the difference between life and death, but now meant nothing. I was questioned until morning in a small room at the gas station, under a fluorescent light that buzzed like a swarm of bees. I told them everything. How I saw her, what she said, about the pickup truck, about the chain, about their smiles. I repeated the same words over and over, and each time it seemed to me that I was talking about something impossible, something that couldn't happen in a world where people buy chips and gas and argue about discounts. One of the cops, a young man with a tired face, went out into the street and came back with something in a bag. Found it in the chain, he said. A small round tracker, like a coin, flashing a red light, cheap but effective. And that red light, flashing in the clean room, was scarier than the fog, because it meant that all of this had been thought out, planned. They weren't random psychos. They were hunters. This isn't the first case, said the second cop, older, with gray temples, quietly. He spoke as if he was ashamed to say it out loud. People disappear. Hitchhikers, tourists. Sometimes just people driving alone at night. We find empty cars. Sometimes bodies in the woods. Sometimes nothing. I looked at him and felt something break inside me. I wanted to ask, why haven't you caught them? But I didn't. There was helplessness in his voice, and that helplessness made me feel worse than any threats. They let me go in the morning, when the fog had lifted and the sun timidly peeked out from behind the hills. I got into the car and realized I couldn't move. My hands were shaking. I looked at the rusty stain on the upholstery, at the place where Lina had been lying, and it seemed to me that the interior still smelled of her, blood and fear. I drove home, but the house no longer felt safe. It was just a box of walls. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every rustle outside the window sounded like footsteps, every headlight like the eyes of the pickup truck. I closed the curtains, checked the locks, put a chair under the door handle like in children's horror stories, and still couldn't shake the feeling that if they wanted to, they would get in. I tried to work. I opened my laptop and saw fog instead of the designs. In every white field, I imagined a road. In every red hue, I saw blood on her palm, fingerprints on the hood. A week later, I received a message on Messenger. An unknown number. No avatar. At first, I thought it was spam. My heart still sank as if from a blow. I opened it. A photo. It shows my Honda, taken at night, from behind, in the parking lot outside my house. I recognized the street light, the trash can, even the crack in the asphalt. My fingers went cold. There was a silhouette in the back seat. Someone's. Too dark to tell who, but something else struck me. The angle of the shot. It was as if the photographer was standing very close, almost next to my window, as if he could lift his head and see me. And the caption, "You let us down. Now it's your turn. We know where you live." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stopped breathing for a few seconds. And then I inhaled so sharply that my ribs hurt. One thought pounded in my head. They're close. Not somewhere, not sometime. Here. I changed my number. I blocked my accounts. I deleted my social media. I bought cameras, installed them by the door and the window, and pointed them at the parking lot. I moved to another state, Massachusetts, to a tiny town by the ocean, where the wind smells of salt and people smile at strangers as if the world is safe. I changed my appearance as much as I could. I cut my hair shorter, grew a beard, stopped wearing my usual jacket. I sold my Honda. I couldn't stand looking at it. Every time I got in, I felt like there was someone in the back seat. I checked the mirror so often that my head started to spin. I got a new job and tried to be normal. I joked in chat rooms, replied to emails, said yes, yes of course. But in the evenings, the fear returned like a tide. Now I had the ocean outside my window, but the nights were still dark. Sometimes cars drove by on the road behind the house, and their headlights ran across the walls like white fingers. And every time I shuddered because it seemed to me, here they are. I started checking the back seat of my new sedan, even if I was only going out for a minute. I did it mechanically. Open the door, lean over, look, breathe in. Sometimes I held my breath so long that my vision began to darken. I laughed at myself, nervously, briefly. "Ryan, you're turning into a paranoid." But it wasn't paranoia. It was my body's memory. The scariest thing isn't the message. It's not even the photo. The scariest thing is how easily they entered my life, as if there were no boundaries between me and them. No, this is where the world ends, as if I had simply opened the door and let them in. Sometimes at night, I think I hear the sound of the chain again. Quiet, metallic. A clink, like an accidental knock on the door handle. I lie there and realize it's not a sound in the room. It's a sound in my head. But that doesn't make it any easier. And then the little things started. One morning, I saw a drop of rusty water on the windshield of my car. It was strange and thick. I wiped it off with my finger, and a brown mark remained on my skin. I stood there looking at the mark, and I felt cold, like in the fog that night. Once in a supermarket, I noticed a man in a black sweatshirt. He was standing by the milk refrigerator and looking not at the shelves, but at me. I looked away, pretending to choose yogurt. When I looked again, he was gone. And I didn't know if he had ever been there or if my fear had begun to draw faces out of thin air. But one evening, I was driving home on an empty road, the one that runs along the ocean. It was already dark, the wind was swaying the trees, and their shadows were dancing on the asphalt. I was driving slowly because deer often run out on the curves, and then I saw the fog. At first, it was thin, like breath on glass. Then it grew thicker. It spread from the ocean, crept onto the road, and covered it like a white cloth. I felt my fingers tighten on the steering wheel. I told myself, it's just the weather, but my heart already knew better. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw headlights. 2 yellow eyes approaching slowly, not quickly, as if they didn't need to hurry, as if they knew I wasn't going anywhere. I tried to speed up. The car obeyed, but the headlights stayed. They kept their distance. It was worse than a chase. It was surveillance. I turned onto another street. The headlights turned with me. I turned again. So did they. My chest felt tight, as if someone were squeezing it with their fist. I told myself, maybe it's just someone driving home. But on an empty road, in the fog, in a small town where almost no one drives at this time, too many coincidences. I took out my phone and dialed 911 without taking my eyes off the road. My finger was shaking so much that I made several mistakes. Beep. Second. Third. And suddenly the connection was lost. The screen showed. Call failed. At that moment, I realized they hadn't just found me. They were playing games. The headlights behind me flashed once, like a signal, like a mockery, like a greeting. I turned toward home because I had only one thought in my head. The light, the camera at the door, the entrance. I drove into the parking lot, jumped out of the car, and ran to the entrance. My keys were shaking in my hands. I could hardly get them into the lock. And at that moment, I heard a sound behind me. Quiet, metallic, a clink, like a chain. I turned around and saw only fog and headlights stopped at the corner in the distance. The car didn't come any closer. It just stood there shining, like a spotlight on a stage, as if they wanted me to know, we are here, we can, we are waiting. I rushed into the entrance and slammed the door shut. I climbed the stairs, not feeling my feet. At home, I turned on all the lights. I checked the windows, the cameras, the lock. Everything was in place. But the feeling was as if someone was standing on the other side of the wall, smiling. I didn't sleep all night. I sat on the sofa with a kitchen knife in my hand, listening to the wind and trying to convince myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined this chain, that the sound wasn't a figment of my imagination. In the morning, I looked at the recordings from the camera at the entrance. The video showed everything. Me running, headlights in the distance, fog. And then, for a second, just a second, a figure appears at the corner of the house, tall, wearing a hoodie. He looks straight at the camera, as if he knows where it is, and raises his hand. Something glitters in his hand. Metal. A chain. And then he disappears into the fog as if he had never been there. I watched the recording over and over again, and every time it seemed to me that I could hear a quiet, barely audible, clinking sound behind the camera. Not from the wind, not from a car. As if someone was dragging the chain across the asphalt on purpose so that I would hear it. I closed my laptop and was overcome by such a feeling of horror that I almost lost consciousness. Not scary, not unpleasant, but horror, cold, absolute, like emptiness. Because now I knew they were nearby. And the worst part was that I didn't know when they would decide to end the game. I live as if on pause, as if my real life ended that night on Highway 89 in the fog, when I pressed the lock button and let someone else's fear into my car. I no longer believe in safety. I don't believe in distance. I don't believe in moving and starting over. Because for them, distance is just a road, and they know the roads better than I do. Sometimes I catch myself waiting, like waiting for pain, like waiting for a blow, because waiting has become constant, and this waiting makes me want to howl. I know that one day the headlights in the mirror will be closer than before. The fog will grow thicker, and I won't have time to turn anywhere. I won't have time to call. I won't have time to close the door. And then I will become part of their collection. Another trophy in the barn, where chains rust and screams echo into the forest. And the scariest thing is that I think they've already picked out a place for me on that wall. And sometimes, when I turn off the light, I feel like someone is whispering in the dark. We're just waiting, choosing the moment. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Please subscribe to the channel and give it a like. It will greatly assist in promoting my channel. Thank you.